Hi, I'm Carol Ann Lloyd, and we're here for another episode of Life Lessons from the Tudors. As you might guess from my decor, we're going to be talking about Tudor Christmas celebrations and what we can learn from them. Now, before we get to the very over the top celebration that started on Christmas Day and went on for quite a while, I do want to mention that unlike today, the days leading up to Christmas were not full of decorating and partying and drinking and eating and all of that. In fact, the Advent, those days leading up to Christmas, were generally spent preparing and fasting. No meat, no cheese, no eggs, none of that yummy stuff. They were spent working really hard. Christmas Day is actually one of the quarter days, and those are the days when rent or payments will be due. There's a lot that goes into preparing for them. It was a very busy time, and it was a time of preparing for the great feasting ahead. So there would have been gathering and purchasing and getting everything ready. But those days leading up to Christmas, all the Christmas countdown where you have a piece of chocolate every day when you open your Advent calendar, not in Tudor times. It was very much a quieter, busier, but busy with work kinds of things time. And that's because once Christmas came, work stopped. Now, didn't stop for the people in the kitchen, and it didn't stop for people taking care of animals. But for a lot of folks, Christmas Day, the first day of Christmas, meant the beginning of a big celebration. And so waiting, it was all about waiting. You didn't decorate your house until Christmas Eve. You didn't bring in from the outside all those beautiful greens, maybe some holly, maybe some evergreen, not a whole tree. There were not Christmas trees, but maybe a branch or a bough. Bring those in, but it's bad luck to do it. You're tempting fate to do it before Christmas Eve. Some people waited until Christmas Day. Now, that doesn't mean nothing fun was happening in December. In fact, there was a tradition of boy bishops that happened during the medieval times and led and fed into some of the Tudor times. So what would happen on St. Nicholas Day, which is the 6th of December, is the choir boys would elect one of their number, a young man, to be the boy bishop. And he would serve as the bishop of that parish until Holy Innocents' Day, which is the 28th of December. So about 3 weeks. Now, not everyone gave all of the authority and the work and the stand up and run this meeting, but some of the boy bishops really did dress up and preach a sermon and make some proclamations. It's said that at Westminster Abbey, they really went for it in terms of what the boy bishops would wear. And the attire was quite spectacular, including silk robes adorned with sparkling silver decorations. Probably not quite as great as my finery today, but it was quite awesome. Now, some people said that it was only on St. Nicholas Day that this happened, but in other parishes, it really did go on for about 3 weeks. Now, good old Henry VIII, of course, comes along and abolishes the boy bishops as part of the Reformation. And we see it fall off during his time, the latter part of his reign, after 1534, and then during Edward VI's reign. When Mary I comes to the throne and begins her attempt to return England to Catholicism, she reinstates the boy bishops, but it does not last very long. She reigns for 5 years, and then Queen Elizabeth comes along. It's abolished again. Doesn't really reappear in any big form, although I hear that in Salisbury Cathedral, this still happens today. I haven't been there during December, so if you have a chance to do that, I would check it out. Now, we often count down the 12 days of Christmas in sort of a phony way so that Christmas Day is the 12th day, or we have those calendars that count down to Christmas Day. But it's true that there were 12 days of Christmas celebrated, but they started on Christmas Day. So the preparation again is starting Christmas Eve. And in addition to bringing in some of the ivy or maybe the holly to decorate your house with, bringing some outside, some inside in the decorating that started Christmas Eve. And early Christmas morning, there was also a tradition of bringing in a Yule log. So you would go out into the forest and find a big log and haul it in and then decorate it with ribbons and all kinds of things. Start it up on Christmas morning and continue to feed the fire so that it would actually burn throughout the 12 days of Christmas. Now, it was thought to be good luck if you had saved some of the embers, some of the ash from the last Christmas, and you would add that to this Christmas's fire. And then when the 12 days of Christmas were over and you let the log burn out, whatever was left, you would gather that up and save it for the next Christmas. So there's this idea of continuity here. It's kind of a cool thing. Another thing that was decorated, and I think this is a great idea. I'd like to learn something from this. The tradition of not working for the 12 days of Christmas really was taken seriously. And so if you happen to have a spinning wheel, and you may have seen images of this, of a spinning wheel that's, decorated with some flowers or some ivy or something. People often did decorate things so that they wouldn't be used. You're not tempted to use it because it's all decorated. So I think maybe I will decorate my computer for the 12 days of Christmas so I don't use it. It's a great idea to really take that time off. Now, again, if you're working in the kitchen, if you're working with the animals, you can't just say, sorry, of course, especially in the kitchen because you're feeding everybody. But the idea was that a lot of the labor did stop during those 12 days. That means the minute it became Christmas Day, the celebrations would begin. And that is like midnight strikes, 12 and 1 second. It's now Christmas Day. Does not mean the children jump out of bed and run down and grab their stockings and start ripping paper off of presents. No. Christmas Eve Mass. That was your first Mass. Right after it turned midnight, the bells would be ringing in churches and the candles would be lit, and people would begin celebrating Christmas by going to church. Christmas itself, Christmas Day, was a religious holiday, and you would generally wear your best clothing to Christmas Mass. There would be a series of masses held throughout the day, so you would have many opportunities. You might give to the poor and give gifts or give alms during one of many masses during the day. Now, the king and queen, if you happen to be at court, whether there was a king and queen during Henry VII's reign, or a king and, various different queens, or sometimes from those rare moments, Henry VIII was without a wife, a king, or then later, as we know, with Mary and Elizabeth, a queen. On Christmas Day, the monarch would wear, yes, a crown on Christmas Day. It was one of the few days during the year that the monarch would actually wear a crown. So just like we often see the monarch, we saw the late Queen Elizabeth II. Now we can see King Charles maybe wear the state crown, the imperial state crown at the opening of Parliament. They used to wear the crown on Christmas. And at court, wherever the Christmas court was being held, Greenwich was one of the favorites, or at Hampton or wherever court was being held, there would be a procession to these masses and the monarchs would be wearing the crown. So it was a great time for worship. Christmas Day also started the feasting, and feasting went on days and nights over the 12 days. There were a couple of really big feasts, and Christmas Day was one of them. Now, if you were a landowner and you had people working on your land, this was a time you would bring out the best food, not only for yourself, but also for those who are working for you. Now, I'm sure you know, if you've heard me talk before, my dear, dear friends, Brigida and Tom Webster live at Old Hall, where the Chamberlain family lived during Tudor times. And as lords of the manor, that family was expected at Christmas time to make sure that the people who worked their land and lived on their land, people in the village, were cared for. And Christmas was one of the times they would hold an open house, interesting term, where they would literally open their house and invite people in over the season, maybe not on Christmas Day itself, but during the Christmas season. And folks would be able to eat food and smell food and see food that they didn't see the whole rest of the year. It was a really special time. And on Christmas Day, maybe they would have their own special feast, and a family might save up and buy a goose, in a story we're familiar with, not a Tudor story, but Dickens' A Christmas Carol. And we see that wonderful Christmas, because a goose is brought in, and the family is able to feast on a goose, and Tiny Tim's going to be okay, and all of those things. But that idea of having something really special for Christmas is something nice. Now, if you are at court during Christmas, boy, all stops are out when it comes to food. There are some of the most amazing delicacies. One of the things we see during the Tudor period is a lot of cooking with spices at Christmas. Now, you might think, oh, we always put spices in everything, but these were very expensive. These were just being discovered in the New World. And so if you were able to taste a little bit of the most recent spices at Christmas, you had really arrived. And so the Christmas courts at the Tudor court, oh, they were spectacular. Now, one of the things that we do hear about, it's in several of the records, although people sometimes question me about this, but I have found it in several records, this idea of a Christmas pie, which is a turkey stuffed with a chicken, stuffed with a partridge, stuffed with a pigeon, and then all baked in a pastry that's called a coffin. Now, this specialty, which sounds a little strange, but is again in the records, this idea of one big bird stuffed with several little birds is part of one of my favorite sort of guilty pleasures, Upstart Crow. And during a Christmas celebration, and they talk about going to see the Queen at court. Shakespeare, it's about Shakespeare, and he's able to go to court. But anyway, they do talk about the celebration with a turkey stuffed with a chicken, stuffed with a goose, stuffed with a. And it is something that was part of this big celebration. Most of us, I'm sorry, common people not at court would not get to see anything like this. But we might have some plum porridge or some of the mince pie, something really special. And the higher up you were on the ladder of society, the more things you might get to eat. But those items, spectacular feasts at Christmas, again, the Lord of the Manor would share. Maybe you wouldn't get that turkey stuffed with a chicken thing, but you might get some pies, or you might get some spices that you wouldn't get at other times during the year. And any leftover food was also shared with the poor. They really wanted to make sure if you were entertaining someone, or you had maybe a noble visiting you at Christmas time, you wanted to make sure you did not run out of food. And so maybe you've really over ordered. Some of us still do that today. So any leftover food, again, the Lord of the Manor would share all of that. There was certainly nothing that was going to go to waste. Now, just like there are open houses, there were open days at court, where if you were lucky enough, well dressed enough, maybe knew some of the right people, you could get into court. And if you were able to do that, you might have been able to see some of these spectacular dishes that were served at the royal court, including something like a peacock with the feathers all put back in. I mean, it was just amazing. Again, one of the favorite spots is Greenwich Palace. And we know for some of the feasts there were extra ovens set up for the holiday feasts. So another important part of the Christmas celebration is gifts. I don't know if you've done all your shopping yet. I haven't. But in any case, gifts were not exchanged on Christmas Day. That was more a day for religious worship and eating. But the gifts were exchanged on New Year's Day. And so we have records, of course, more records of the wealthy and people at court. So we know something about gift giving there. We don't really know how it was done always in some of these other smaller homes and throughout villages. So I'll just share some of the things we know about court. You can maybe imagine how this might happen in your own home. At the beginning of the Tudor reign, gift giving was very organized. It was quite structured. And at the highest levels, King and Queen, Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, it was pretty private. So on the morning of New Year's Day, the monarchs would awaken and gift giving would begin. And the records say that the king and queen both stayed in their bedchambers. Yes, they had separate ones, and that doesn't indicate a problem. That's just how it was done. So they had their separate chambers, and the king and queen would start with each other. It's very structured. you go down the social ladder. King and queen are first. So they give gifts to each other, and then they might give gifts to their children. But the records indicate that all the gifts that the king and queen received, they received in bed. And we see in the records, special servants brought on that day and paid to bring the gifts to the king and the queen in their chamber. So, imagine Henry VII or Elizabeth of York. I'm imagining myself as Elizabeth of York, lounging in bed and having servants bring me gifts. It sounds like a pretty good way to start the new year. Now, of course, Henry VIII comes along and he wants it to be a big public thing. He always wanted to be center stage, and he wanted a crowd. None of this giving gifts when there are only a couple of servants who get to see what I got. I want everyone to see what I got, said Henry VIII. He would claim to have the biggest crowds and the best gifts. So if you were giving a gift to the king, you wanted to make sure that it arrived either delivered by you or delivered by the messenger that you had sent in plenty of time to be shuffled into the order, because the gift rolls, and that's how we know so much careful records were kept of each gift that was given to the monarch and then given by the monarch to someone else. And it was all written down very carefully, and it was done very much in a hierarchical order. So you want to make sure you're not late, your servant's not late. When it's your turn, you're ready to go with something spectacular. Now, there was one year that we really get a glimpse into what's going on at court and some of the awkwardness of the celebration, because Henry VIII, as you know, was married to Catherine of Aragon first, decided to marry Anne Boleyn. That didn't happen quite as quickly as either of them had thought or hoped. And so after a while, they decided to celebrate Christmas together, even though they weren't married. And people were pretty awkward about that, because technically Catherine was still queen and she wasn't allowed to come, and it was kind of a big deal. But Henry set Anne up as queen. And by doing so, and by giving the first gift he gave to her and allowing hers to be the gift that first comes to him, he is upending the court. Because even if Catherine is not in that room, he has other relatives. There are nobles. There are people who definitely outrank Anne Boleyn, but he's setting her up as queen. So that's a really interesting thing that we can see from that record. It's also interesting what they give each other. Anne Boleyn gives Henry VIII boar spears. Now, this is exactly something he would want. It plays into his being an athlete, his being a hunter. Now, you have to remember, earlier in his reign, in these days, he's still fit. He's still got broad shoulders and more of a narrow waist, rather than the other way around. He's very fit. He's athletic. He loves to ride. He loves to joust. He loves to hunt. And so giving him something that plays into his physical prowess, that plays into his athleticism and strength. Boy, she knew what she was doing, and he was really excited about it. And what did he give her? Bed hangings. Bed hangings. This was quite an intimate gift. Again, Henry VIII was ready to get married to this woman, and to give her something like that, to focus on the bed where he hoped that she would conceive his son soon. It was quite an intimate and probably a little shocking. Now, as the day went on and he received other spectacular gifts, we know that even though she'd been told not to, Catherine of Aragon did send him a gift. Now, this gift is coming from the Queen, and it is presented by an agent of the Queen with great fanfare. And Henry's in quite an awkward position. If he accepts a gift from Catherine of Aragon, coming officially from the Queen, from her servant, being presented to him as a gift from the Queen, he's claiming she's not really the Queen, it's quite awkward. But there are representatives of Catherine and Charles V, her nephew, and Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. There are a lot of people at court. Remember, he wants this big audience. He wants everyone watching him. Well, now what's he going to do? If he returns it, it's a huge affront to her. And if he returns it as soon as she gives it to him, as soon as the servant gives it to him, the servant has time to go back and then return with it again. So he has to kind of time, when is he going to give it back? How publicly is he going to return this gift? All of this, just these gift rolls and the records of the gift giving on New Year's Day in these important years where Henry has repudiated Catherine, but he has not yet married Anne. We can see all the tensions of that play out right at Christmas. It's really quite spectacular, or rather New Year's Day, but during the Christmas celebrations. So it's pretty spectacular to see some of these things happening. Now, we know that there was a period of time that Henry did celebrate Christmas less extravagantly. For example, his wife, Jane Seymour, third wife, had given him a son in October, and then sadly she had died. And so by that Christmas, although he was looking for a new wife by then, of course, he didn't have a new wife by then for a couple of years. And so there's no queen at court. So you can see in the gift rolls, there's no queen's gift being given or received. It's just another reminder of what's happening sort of on the personal family level of the monarchy and the official level, because all of these gifts were given in a very official way. If you managed to give the monarch something that was really appreciated, that could go a long way in advancing your status at court. If the monarch was disappointed in your gift, not so good. Sort of like today, but even more so. All right, now, Henry's daughter, Elizabeth I, we have a lot of her gift rolls. They are amazing. They're rolled up, they're huge, and then sometimes they unroll them. They were on display at the Met a few years ago when there was a Tudor exhibition there. I've also seen one of Elizabeth's gift rolls at the Folger Shakespeare Library. They are just amazing, and we can learn a lot from Elizabeth's gift rolls as well. Now, she really liked big, extravagant gifts. She really liked being courted in this way, being wooed, not only in a suitor looking for her hand, but her favor. She really liked people trying to impress her. Now, this might sound really selfish or self-serving, but you have to remember the way Elizabeth grew up. Before she was 3 years old, her mother was executed. Her mother's head was cut off by her father. She was now out of favor. She did not have the clothing she needed. Her governess was begging Cromwell for some clothes for her. She was out of favor. She did get back to court sometimes, especially by the time Henry was married to Catherine Parr. She was out of favor part of Edward's reign. She was certainly out of favor during Mary's reign. By the time she came to the throne, she was 25 years old and had spent most of her life being out of favor and not being able to receive people's adoration and gifts and excitement to be in her presence. So I think there might have been some of that. On the other hand, she did inherit from her father loving to be the center of attention and having big crowds and everyone look at me on all these spectacular things she was getting. One of the things apparently she really loved to get was sleeves. Now, our sleeves are connected to our clothing, but in Tudor times, the sleeves were tied onto a bodice, and so sleeves could be changed. You could really change the look of an outfit with different sleeves, and we see several times when Elizabeth is given very elaborate, bejeweled, rich fabric, amazing sleeves, which might seem like an odd thing, but she loved things like that. She loved jewelry. But even while she loved all these spectacular, expensive gifts, she also did realize that not everyone could do that. And so when her baker, when her gingerbread baker, when some of the people who worked for her made her special things, she really appreciated those as well. We know Queen Elizabeth, during her coronation procession, would stop the procession to receive flowers from people in London who were just running up, including children, just running up to give flowers to her and throw them into her open carriage. And this was criticized by foreign ambassadors who couldn't believe that she would stop and speak to the common people. Well, Elizabeth knew that she needed the love and support of the common people. And she gave them appreciation, whether it was people bringing flowers during her coronation, or a servant making a special pie, or giving some oranges or something special to her. She may really appreciate the big sleeves, but she also appreciated the gifts that maybe weren't as expensive overall, but were a big sacrifice for the person giving. Now, we do know that there was a little re-gifting going on. I don't know about you, but I try and keep, not that I'm admitting I have ever re-gifted anything, but if I have tried to keep that quiet. Not so much with Elizabeth. In the record, one year, she is given this beautiful sounding gilt bowl or golden bowl. It's described being decorated. And then the record goes on to say that it was later given to Lord Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. In other words, she gets this gold. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Here you go. Now, I do wonder what that means, what was going on. Robert Dudley was her BFF. He thought he could marry her. She didn't marry him, but she kept him at her side throughout her reign until he died. So it seems completely unlikely to me she would have forgotten to give him a gift. However, maybe he expressed some appreciation for this bowl. Maybe he thought it was beautiful. For whatever reason, she turns around and gives it to him. Now imagine you're the one who's given Elizabeth this bowl. How are you feeling? This is done pretty publicly. Do you feel hurt that you put all this thought into it and got her a great gift and she turned around to give it to somebody else? Or are you excited because of all the people she could have chosen? She gives it to Robert Dudley. I mean, that is a seal of approval on your gift. I don't know, but we do know that there was regifting going on. So if that's something you do, you can just say you learned it from Elizabeth I. Now, 12th night. So after we have this big New Year's Day celebration, 12th night is another one of the over-the-top celebrations. Things are coming to an end, right? 12th night, 12 days of Christmas. Uh-oh, we're going back to work really soon. We might think of New Year's Eve being sort of that kind of thing. This was later than that. But anyway, we're looking at 12th night, and it represented an opportunity to end things with a bang, to really wrap up this Christmas season in a great way. And so it did include more feasting. No surprise there. One of the fun things was there was a 12th night cake. So if you're a family in a village and you have some family visiting, and we know that as a lot of things stopped, the working stopped, people did visit friends and family during the holidays. So maybe you have a house full on 12th night and you make this special 12th night cake and you put a bean or a coin or a something in that cake, slice it up, hand it out, and whoever gets the bean is king or queen of the bean, or king or queen of the coin, or king or queen of the night. And that means that person is the one who is in charge. And perhaps you're a noble household and someone of lower status than you got that. That's all right. That person is in charge, gets to sit in the big seat. That would typically be in many households the one chair. That wasn't a bench. Usually you'd sit on the bench. There's maybe one chair at the head. That was where the chairman of course, the board is what the table is referred to. That's where we get chairman of the board, because it would be a man as head of household who would sit in that chair, and he was a chairman of the board or of the table. You got to be chairman of the board that night. And it was really a fun way of sort of upending things and spicing things up, having all these feasts, and maybe someone of lower standing in charge and ordering people around or requesting special things. Sometimes they would also play a game where whatever the person who was the king or queen of the night would say or do, everybody else had to say or do, almost as Simon Says. Anyway, lots of fun things could happen in households throughout the land. And there's sort of a hint of this at court. And in some households, this person did sort of take on the role of Lord of Misrule. Now, 12th night was a time of upending, whether it's upending a little status at your Christmas feast or whether it's really upending things by the Lord of Misrule, who is to work within some guidelines, but even at court, even with the king or queen, the Lord of Misrule is sort of like a fool, can say anything to the king or queen, can hurry in and sit on the special throne for the king or queen. So the Lord of Misrule sort of bounces around, causing some fun within some boundaries, chaos and havoc during a Christmas celebration at court. Now, we know from Henry VIII, from his court records, that he did not simply pass out a cake and see who might get the bean to end up being Lord of Misrule. He actually hired a Lord of Misrule, someone he knew would bring the festivities to a really fun level, perhaps say what they want to him, perhaps jazz him a little, perhaps steal his chair, but not take things too far. This is true for Elizabeth I as well, and we know that Dudley was her Lord of Misrule one time. Now, this was another time for some really spectacular feasting, and often included what was known then as the banqueting course. Now, we sometimes think, oh, a banquet, that's like a big feast. In Tudor times, the main meal, where you had your meat and you had your vegetables and you had more meat, there was a lot of meat, was one thing, but the sweets banquet was something else. It was held in another room. Sometimes it was held in a special banqueting house that's apart from the main house. For example, if you go to one of my favorite places in the States, in Virginia, Agecroft Hall, you can see the beautiful manor house. Then if you go out into the back garden, there's a little banqueting house. That's where the banquet would be held. It's not for everybody invited to the main feast. Few people are invited to the banquet. And when you went into this area, this room, or this banqueting house, you would find tables overflowing with sweets. And for someone like Elizabeth I, who was known for her sweet tooth, it was a must on 12th night. So you might find candied fruits and jellies and biscuits and tarts and sweet wine, all kinds of things. Sugar was just added to everything. And marchpane, which is a little bit like marzipan, was something that could be molded. And by the time we get to Elizabeth's reign, these creations that were edible, that were made out of marchpane, are spectacular. It might be a goblet that is filled with sweet wine, and then you eat the goblet after. Or in one case, we have a description of a castle that was made out of marchpane. And one of my favorites, which has been recreated by Brigida Webster and her daughter, was a chessboard. There is a record of Elizabeth receiving as a special gift a chessboard that's made out of marchpane with little chess figures, complete with the whole set, and all of it was edible. And so that was a pretty spectacular time. The other thing the queen would sometimes do is have her special gingerbread baker, and she had a special gingerbread baker, make little gingerbread favors for everybody to take home who was invited to this special banqueting course. And there might be a little gift inside. And so it was just something that was a gesture on her part, was very well received by others, a little bit of a way of showing off, but it is this really grand time. So 12th night, over the top. I do think it has some similarities to New Year's Eve in some ways. And then the next day was celebrated the Epiphany. And again, that was a day of going to church. There was a lot of church, a lot of mass that happened during this time. But also you might find an Epiphany tart, which was shaped like a star that led the wise men, and then filled with jam or with fruit. And at this point, the holiday is winding down. Now, that's for most people. There were some people at court who just kept going with the celebration. But for most people, the holiday was winding down. And the Monday after 12th night was called traditionally Plow Monday. And that's sort of the day the plow comes out and you take the decorations off the spinning wheel. You get all those decorations out of your house, because if you leave those holiday decorations up, the sprites might come out and cause the kind of chaos you don't want. Remember to save some of the ashes left from your Yule log so you can use them again next year. Now, the plow itself was decorated a little bit in some villages and taken from house to house to ask people for a little bit of money for the parish church or some other things. It's not always clear where the money went. And the tradition is that if you as a family don't give a little money when the plow comes to your house, a trick will be played on you. There's a little element of trick or treat here. You give them the treat, which is money, or you get a trick played on you. That's a little early Halloween going on there. But in any case, supposedly the money then goes back to the parish. And we know that in some cases, it was used to maintain a special candle that would burn throughout the year. So, what lessons from all of that celebrating can we learn from the Tudors and the way they celebrated Christmas? Well, I've learned, I would say maybe 3 takeaways for me. One is the idea of not working on those 12 days of Christmas. And so rather than saying, oh, good, I'll have some time where I'm off this and I can really work on this, maybe just try and take some time off, decorate your computer or whatever. I know we don't all have the chance. Some of us have to go back to work the very next day, but it's a nice idea. Second, and probably most important, is to use the holiday time to take care of those in need. In Tudor times, it was expected that, as the scriptures say that they believed in, where much is given, much is required. And Christmas time was a specific time that lords of the manor and even at court would open up. The idea of an open house was to invite all kinds of people in. So look for ways that you can take care of those who are less fortunate. And finally, I love the idea of a sweets banquet at the end of the meal. I think I'm going to look for a way I can work that into some holiday celebrating. So I hope you've enjoyed spending some time with a Tudor Christmas and realizing that even during the fun times we laugh, we joke about, we still do see that there are lessons to be learned from the Tudors, because, as I'm always saying, history shows us what's possible. I hope you have a wonderful history holiday. Whatever you do, stay safe and warm, and I'll see you next year for more life lessons from history. Thanks so much, and happy history holidays.